money is one of those things where I have a rule.
Uh-huh.
I don't give you anything I can't afford to give.
I give money sometimes when I have, like, I give him the money because I know that. But before I give him the money, I know that
It's
this
not gonna
money
come
won't
back.
come back.
Yeah, yeah.
If
So
I-
that-
that-
that's
that's what
so-
I'm saying.
I won't track it. I
It's
don't
like
care
sadaqah.
because it's
Right.
yeah.
But if they give it back, then it's alhamdulillah.
Then it's
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
then it's
But
like
he will
no. If
stay
they give it
thinking
back, then it's like
about that.
sadaqah for them,
Yeah.
right? Because if you let it go in your mind that I'm giving this and I'm not expecting back, it's fi sabilillah sadaqah, right? Then if they give it back to you, then it's a sadaqah for them. So everybody gets like ajr, man. If it's like a win-win, you know. See, yeah, see,
Like right before you
see. That's why I get to wear the big hat. See, that's why I get to wear the big hat.
It's like finding $20 in your jeans right before you're about to wash it. It's like, oh man, even though it's yours,
It's yours, but it's like you gave yourself sadaqah. Wow.
$20 bill.
La as'alukum alayhi ajran. I don't ask you for any reward. So before, because I know you're gonna have to bounce out in a minute, right? Oh, you got a little. Okay,
Yeah, I
we
got
got
time.
okay.
It's 8:00. Yeah, we can move in a little.
Oh, okay.
We don't have to project this.
You know that big hat we gotta make.
Well, subhanAllah, we keep them earning.
I gotta earn my keep, man. So we were talking.
Oh, yeah.
I think sometime over the last couple of weeks, we had discussed the notion of morality and universal law.
Okay.
Right? This idea of there's obviously there's certain things we got to do. There's certain things that we believe that are either morally upright, or certain things that we believe that might be reprehensible, something that is either salih, like good, or something that is munkar, right? However, other people may not, they may reject that, they may not think it's so, right? But we hear, I hear a lot of Muslims talk a lot about Islam being a universal religion, right? What does that mean, though? Because if it's universal, then there's an obligation for everybody to do it. And in fact, even the Quran acknowledged, la ikraha fi din, qad tabayyana rushd min al-ghayy, right? That, there's no compulsion, right? And that which is clear stands apart from that which is not, guidance stands apart from falsehood. So it kind of complicates the idea a little bit. I know this will almost seem backwards, to some, for some of us as Muslims to think that Islam is not universal. It's kind of, again, it's a little bit paradoxical, meaning that it kind of is and it kind of isn't, right? It is universal in terms of who is writing the law, right? Right. So Allah, as the lawgiver, has said that gambling is impermissible, and therefore to do it is an immoral act, or homosexuality, or whatever, any of the things that Allah has forbidden. At the same time, we're not going around and telling people like, hey, you have to do this. We are saying in some ways, though, you really do want to do this, because there will be consequences that you will face on the day of judgment, right? If you don't do it. So there's kind of also what makes the universality part, I think, a little bit complicated is what we call temporality, right? Meaning like now, in this life, hey man, you can do what you want to do, but you will ultimately face the consequences, right, of what you do. So in modern times, the way that they have tried to concoct a false religion, right? So part of secularism, rationalism, they've tried to kind of go into the lab and synthetically concoct a kind of religion in some way. And in doing so, they tried to appeal to this thing called natural law, right? It was like Kant's big thing was all about, natural law. And he really put a lot of confidence, misplaced confidence, in what he almost felt was like the infallibility of the faculty of reason, right? And therefore you could reason your way pretty much anything. If you could find a way to reason it out, then it has to be moral. It could not be immoral, right? So when he says, if a rule does not generally withstand the test of the form of a natural law, is it morally impossible? If one is to believe our author, meaning Kant, he says this double criterion contains the canon which allows us to evaluate our actions in general and the means of self-instruction, right? That's the one of the big differences, is that from the Quranic point of view, the human being is incapable of self-instruction, like as completely self-contained, right? Now, we can do self-reflection, and this is where Allah actually asks, He will ask us, or saying that, fis samawati wal ard ayatihi, like in the heavens and the earth are His signs, and afala ta'aqilun, afala tatadhakkarun, this kind of thing. Will you not think? Will you not contemplate? So He asks us to do self-reflection, but in terms of governing ourselves, right, we will never be able to. We'll never be able to come up with a system of self-governance without something other than ourselves at the foundation of it, right? So we can come up with all kinds of human laws, like, saying that, okay, in a school zone, there has to be speed bumps. Okay, that's fine. That makes sense, right? But the foundational morality of society is not capable of simply being thought up on its own. So this, I think, kind of turns on its head a little bit when we get into the business of da'wah, of trying to preach and proselytize Islam. We often like to say, "Oh, it's a universal religion." Well, what does that mean, right? Especially given the fact that for the at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and then of course for the bulk of human history, non-Muslims have lived within Muslim society, and for the most part, there was not coercion for them to have to convert. There might have been, obviously, a Muslim society or government may have a preference that, okay, well, this is going to kind of be the official religion of this region, but non-Muslims clearly felt for a long period of time, Jews and Christians, they felt comfortable enough to live with Muslims, and only until the modern time, which is just violent period, that we start to see these issues. But through a lot of pre-modern times, for the most part, they were able to live with them. How was that able to do so if it was a universal religion? I know it seems complicated, but this paradoxical understanding is necessary in order for it to make sense.
So the universality is only referring to the morality concepts?
No. I mean, again, I think you can almost think of it like as two tiers, right? There are certain truths that are absolutely true, like Allah is one, right? La ilaha illallah. This is a so-called universal truth, but we don't require people to have to believe in it, right? Like Christians living in a Muslim land believe God is 3 in 1, or Jesus is the Son of God. And for the vast tract of history of non-Muslims living in Muslim lands, or particularly Christians, were allowed to essentially espouse the idea of Jesus is the Son of God, even though that's a clear contradiction of Islamic theology. So again, perhaps the reason why Muslims want to rush to they want to sort of like try to retreat to this idea of a connection between universality and morality is to make some sort of defense of Islam, right? But there are many problems with that, and that essentially what I'm trying to say is a thing can be still obligatory. It can be wajib, right? It can be obligatory for you to either believe in or have to do or have not to do without it having to be universally binding on everybody else. Like, for instance, we don't drink alcohol, not because we don't like the taste of it, but because Allah said you can't drink it, right? And we are free to believe that drinking alcohol is a morally reprehensible act, even for non-Muslims, right? But it's their choice if they want to do so. And therefore, I have the right to abstain from it, even if, say, the cultural context that I'm living in, it's normal. It's normal to gamble. It's normal to drink. It's normal to fornicate. It's normal to eat pork. It's normal to, right? Therefore, then there is an aspect of universality, meaning no matter where I go, those rules apply, even if everybody else around me is doing something different. So the appeal for universality in some ways should be more about what standard we hold ourselves to as a primary. And then as a secondary, yes, we call people to it. I mean, this is the actual meaning of da'wah, right? You're calling people not only to la ilaha illallah, to this theological about Allah being one, but you're also calling people to a morally upright way of life. So just, keeping in mind that the always wanting to articulate it as a something that is always a concomitant between universality and morality can sometimes be a dangerous thing to do.
So can it be universal for your own thoughts, but not obligatory on them because they just don't know it or they're not aware of it, they don't see the light in it or whatever?
If you restrict that to the temporal, meaning that, okay, like homosexuality, okay, if a man wants to sodomize another man, which is insane, right? Under no condition do I want it to be misunderstood that will be an act that you will have to face in the hereafter. Whether you believe it to be, right now, you may believe in this life, in this temporal existence, that, hey, it's okay to fornicate and to commit same-sexual acts, you may believe that, right? But no, on the universal level, yeah, you will face that. Or murder, right? Like murder. Killing somebody, maybe you've concocted some way, like the United States Army, which has gone around the earth and killed, I don't know how many, killed how many innocent people. And you can say, well, all this was done in the name of freedom and patriotism and, whatever else you want to call it, but it's still murder. It's like, it was like in World War II, a lot of Germans tried to defend their participation in the attempted extinction of the Jews by saying, just what? I was only following orders. Well, if somebody gives you an order to kill somebody without a right, you're committing murder. I don't care whether your commanding officer told you to do it or not. It doesn't change the fact that you just murdered somebody, right? So if you have this idea of, I was just following orders and that will exonerate me, no, right? There is still a universal, morality that can judge you then, right? In this life, that's always kind of like, there's always some kind of contestation in this life of whether or not, it will or will not be. But in the ultimate sense, in the hereafter, then yeah, everybody is subjected to that. So he writes, the Kantian formulation, like the vulgar statement to which it appeals, is incapable of providing the difference between an obligatory act and one that is not forbidden. Now, we talked about this a little bit when I did my Usul al-Fiqh class, right? There's the difference between something that's wajib and something that we call obligatory, and then something we call mubah, right? Like that's just neutral, like permissible, like yajuz, you can do it,
Whatever
right?
you want, right?
There's a difference between this, and I think that's something that natural law can't really comprehend, right? Either you just do something because you want to do it, like it's really just a matter of shahawat, of passions, right? Versus we have an idea that there's some things we have to do or have not to do. Like we have to pray or we have to not eat pork or whatnot, right? And then simply that, like the 4 raka'ah before dhuhr, it's not forbidden that I don't pray it, but it's an option. This is something that universality, right? Even though the Prophet ﷺ, he forbade, right? He forbade celibacy. At the same time, he didn't make it obligatory for people to get married. Do you understand? Because there's a fine
That's
line.
kind of a paradox in some sense, right?
Yeah, there's a paradox and a fine line in those two, right? So it's haram to have the intention not to marry out of the idea of being celibate, right? Because celibacy isn't just about, it's an intention to not have sexual relations, right? That is not permissible. The Prophet ﷺ forbade that, right? Now, as to whether you can elevate that to the same level of impermissibility as something that Allah forbids in the Quran is another discussion. But just for the sake of this argument, the Prophet ﷺ in numerous hadith is said to have forbade celibacy, meaning the explicit intention to not marry so that you will not have sexual relations, right? This is something that he forbade. However, he didn't make it obligatory that every single person has to get married, because there are requirements for marriage, right? I mean, therefore, if you want everybody to have to get married, then you're also going to have to somehow or another fulfill all of the obligations and requirements. Rather, we had to fulfill the requirements that would enable everybody to get married.
What are those requirements again?
Well, if you think about it, one, you have to be of a maritable age,
Right.
right? So you have to be mukallaf, you have to be a maritable age. And then you have to have some ability to provide.
Yeah, financial security.
So let's say you're like literally like a homeless guy living on the street. Well, if he has to get married, well, then somehow or another, we have to
Somebody
provide the
keep
means
that.
for him to get out of homelessness, right? Now, yes, we should generally help the poor and whatnot. That's clearly like an Islamic moral kind of imperative of feeding the poor, the homeless, that kind of thing, right? That's not the same thing as, we have to necessarily end poverty. Do you understand? Do you follow what I'm saying here? It would be nice to end poverty. Don't get me wrong. And
I was thinking more in the lines of physical capability and mental capability.
well, if you're living on the street, that would fall under definitely physical capability
Also mental sometimes.
and perhaps mental, right?
Yeah.
Now you could just be like, even if you just say like a guy you're just down on your luck and you're living in the street, you're mentally sound, but you can't provide anything for a family living on the street, right? So there's a fine line between, in just as this example, right? The Prophet ﷺ forbidding people having the intention explicitly not to have sex, right? But at the same time, not making it a sinful act not to get married, right? It's sinful to have the intention not to have sex, to not marry and have sex, because it's essentially both marriage and sex, because in Islam there is no lawful sexual, intercourse without marriage. So it's sinful to make the intention to not marry and to not have sex as an intention, which, again, in another hadith, some of the companions were sitting around talking one day and they're like, oh man, we're going to be so pious. I'm paraphrasing here. Like, we're going to live this super pious life. So one of them was like, I'm never going to eat meat. I'm going to give up meat. right? And another was like, I'm never going to sleep with women. I'm never going to have right. So when the Prophet ﷺ, like encountered them, was like, what are you guys doing? What are you talking about? And they told him their grand plan, right? Thinking that he was going to be down with it. It was like, what are you talking about? I eat meat and I'm married and I sleep with women. What is your problem? Like, you know,
Fasting, man.
yeah, and then the other guy was like, I'm gonna fast in perpetuity, right? And he was like, I fast and then I don't fast, and I marry women and I have intimate relations, right? And I eat meat. Like, stop trying to concoct, right? Even though you may think this is right, it's like you don't get to write your own moral code.
That's the key.
Right? Allah is the legislator of that, and I'm the demonstrator, right? You guys then just sama'na wa ta'ana. We just listen and obey. Don't get into the business of trying to, in usul, we call this tanafus. Like you're trying to compete in a sense.
If we say it's
You
like
know.
running from the exam,
Right.
because if you're married, you have exam. If you're fasting, you have exam. So you have to stop fasting and then fasting. Stop fasting, it's like jihad. But if you stay fasting, nothing will happen. And you don't see the women, you will stay like straight. Exactly. But there's no jihad there.
And also, if you make this, like, let's say, for instance, the celibacy part, right? Because the Christians have this, or at least the Catholics, right? Some
That's
of
why
them
they're in
have this,
trouble now.
right? No, I mean, if this, and especially because it tends to be perceived as an elitism, like a moral
Yeah.
elitism, not like a everyday, like what we call like yomian, like a everyday quotidian morality for the average person. No, this is like on a
We're in a different
on a
group.
maqam, like you're on some higher level. Well, naturally, if I'm down here and that's up there, I should want to get up there. If everybody aspires to become celibate, imagine what would happen. That'd be the end of the human race. In one generation, if everybody became and they actually followed that example, the entire human race would be extinct. So this idea that there's like a special elite, Delta Force morality group, right? This doesn't exist in Islam, right? The Prophet ﷺ is the ultimate exemplar, and he fasted and didn't fast, and he married and had children, and he ate meat, and even if it wasn't with great frequency, he ate meat. And then there's a debate because a lot of now there's this push for like vegan, vegetarian. Well, the Prophet ﷺ didn't eat. Well, he was also living in the middle of a desert, okay, and faced starvation at certain points and whatnot. And I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of also context into the diet that the Prophet ﷺ ate, right? So we have to take that into the broader, conversation about, was the Prophet ﷺ really like a vegetarian? No, he was not a vegetarian. He ate meat.
Yes.
Enough of this stuff, right?
To...
And he also chastised one of his close companions about giving up meat as some sort of like moral holy act. He's like, no. Nobody's more pious. It's basically like a clap back. Like nobody's more pious than I am. I am the prophet, and nobody's more pious than me, and I eat meat. Right? Nobody's more pious than me, and I have relations with women. Nobody's more pious than me, and there's days that I don't fast.
You guys are, you may laugh at this, but we're entering in an age where, we talk about celibacy. There comes a point where I was watching this, that there are robots basically in the form of skin flesh that basically act as humans.
Oh yeah. I saw this on the other day.
So if you're tired of women, like they're always nagging at you, and you marry one of these things or have this, I'm like, it's the same thing as being not with a human being anymore.
Oh, it's yeah.
I like his point about there's in yours as well it's the concept of the mujahid.
Going back for it.
Yeah, the mujahid. It's no struggle if
you keep doing it all the time.
Right. And it's like, what are you doing?
You'll be like the Buddhists.
Yeah, and
they're people feed them always.
And
every day the people. I saw one of the reports. They walk like 30 miles every day climbing the mountain, the end, the people without
Yeah, they're like
food.
faqir. They just come and beg for.
yeah.
People
you know.
give them the food to eat. That's all.
Even the Prophet ﷺ also, he actually reprimanded a poor man for begging.
Mhm.
And then also instructed his companions again, like, hey, it's better that somebody kind of take care of this guy so that he doesn't have to beg, because he's like, no, this is not a religion of beggars. If Allah happens to have a person in that state, okay, you have mercy upon them, you help them. We don't have this kind of like we don't have like a brutal code of morality. No, we care about people who are downtrodden, but we don't seek out specifically ourselves to become beggars. This is not something that, right? So this is why it's important to have an understanding of the morality that the Quran espouses, the morality that the Prophet ﷺ espouses, because sometimes we may think that being poor is the solution, or we think that being rich is the solution. Like I said in that verse, Allah says, وَلَوْ بَسَطَ اللَّهُ الرِّزْقَ لِعِبَادِهِ لَبَغَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And if Allah were to bestow, wealth, essentially increase the rizq of some of his ibad. And Allah always refers to his ibad as what? Those are الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Meaning the good people. If he gave the good people that worship him more wealth, he said, what? لَبَغَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ. They would just simply cause chaos. They would be tyrannical, because we think wealth sometimes, I would be more pious if I had more money. Or, man, if I had the same money as the king of Saudi Arabia, I wouldn't spend $500 million on a painting. I would, No, you wouldn't. Allah is telling you, no, you wouldn't. Most of you, if I gave you wealth, you would do the same thing, because something happens when you get a little money in your pocket. So this idea of like either if I had the money, I would do good, or money is the root of all evil, so I will seek poverty and I'll use that to justify an irresponsible lifestyle, right? And money, we get these like cultural aphorisms, like these aqwal, money is the root of all evil. There's nothing in Quran or from the Prophet ﷺ that justifies money is the root of all evil. Not the root, no. It can certainly be a fitan, it can be a test, but not that is the root of all evil. This is a very...
it's a biblical concept, right? Can't worship man and money. God and
it's
money.
true, but the idea of the root of all, no, it's not the root of all evil. So what happens is now, as a result of this, right, and as I said, this idea of universality and morality, right, and then wanting to appeal to natural law, right, reasoning. Now people have a confusion between morality and legality, right? We have that now today, where and you see this now in the Muslims, and I think this is where a lot of this left-leaning, where you have Muslims now who are becoming openly pro-LGBTQ, right? Why? Not because, it's because they live in a so-called secular land where legality takes on the form of like a sort of fiqh council, right? And therefore, because, this lobbying group was able to successfully lobby the American government based on the Constitution or whatever, that no longer can you discriminate based upon sexual affiliation or whatever you want to call it. Essentially saying now it's no longer illegal to be openly homosexual, or it's no longer illegal to perform homosexual acts, which at one point most states, sodomy, right, was considered to be not only immoral but illegal. Now, because the legality of it has changed, the morality of it has also changed in many people's minds, including in many Muslim minds, because we live in this, we live in a certain kind of pond where, depending on the cleanliness of the water, it's like what the analogy of the frog, right? If you slowly keep turning up the heat in small increments to the boiling point, the frog will just stay in the water until it's boiling and then it's dead, right? So the same thing with us, because the legality has changed, some of us have like, oh, I guess there's no difference between morality and legality. So whatever is legal is moral, right? There is that confusion today. And that's why I meant about having on the first tier, the universality of Islam is first for the mu'min to impose upon his or herself, so that you will conform with what it's going to be pleasing to Allah, even if it runs counter, to even if it runs counter to what is either popular or legal in whatever society or culture that you're living in, right? So you said that the most unfortunate confusion is that which is so-called Kant's so-called touchstone may introduce in the individual conscious, right? And that's what I'm talking about now, like how we've changed to conflate legality with morality by granting it the right to declare any action morally good, which it willingly elevates to universal, even if it were the most reprehensible. The homosexuality, thing is a good, example, low-hanging fruit example of this, is that it has, because we've become divorced from the idea of really having this, I don't know, perhaps a good word is to use taqwa, right? And ittiqa, right, is the noun from, right? Ittiqa means to what? Protect yourself against something that will harm you. Meaning that I have, it's like if there's a person over there, shooting at me, I got to take cover. Forget about shooting back. And the first reaction that I have to do, I have to protect myself. I got to get some distance or barrier in between somebody shooting at me, right? This is kind of the meaning of taqwa when Allah says, wattaqul yawm or fattaqun nar, right? It doesn't just say fear, right? But really like protect yourself from a day or protect yourself from a fire, right? وَقُودَهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ, right? That is made of, whose fuel is men and stones, right? Protect yourself from that day, because if you leave yourself open to vulnerability, once the day comes, then there's nothing you can do. If you leave yourself open to the vulnerability of fire, if you don't avoid it, once you're in the fire, there's nothing you can do, right? So it's a preemptive kind of thing. In the same way, if we've lost that idea of protecting ourselves from Allah's displeasure, then we will inevitably kind of conflate legality with morality, and then we'll kind of dissolve. Like we will, whatever distinctness we had about ourselves that was Muslim, will just kind of generally fade away. And you see now, I know it's uncomfortable for some people, but you see many Muslims they do kind of have like they say, well, I'm American now. Well, I'm American too, but it's a secondary identity. I mean, I'm definitely American in terms of my culture and many other things, but I'm Muslim first. Now, it's funny, you see this in the evangelicals. People were surprised that even Mike Pence, when they were on the campaign trail, I don't know if anybody caught this, Mike Pence was talking one time, and he said, well, I identify first as a Christian.
Right.
Then as an American, and then as a conservative, and then as a Republican, and right. So it was, and some people were like, "Oh my God, Mike Pence identified as a Christian." Yeah, what's wrong with that? Even some Muslims were incensed at it. I'm like, well, if you just took away Mike Pence and put in Mark Manley, and you took away Christian and put in Muslim, that's me, right? I identify as Muslim first, and then all these other things, subsequent to it. And he's also famous, right? And I'm not trying to throw shade at Mike Pence. I don't have any particular love or hatred for the guy. But it was interesting when he said, "What? I don't shake the hands of women." I was like, man, somebody needs to give this dude down.
He said that?
Yes, there was some instance. You can look it up. There was this instance where Mike Pence either handshake or hug. I forget which one it was, but basically like, and then he said, something like, I'm paraphrasing again. I don't think my wife would appreciate that. I was like, my man. I was like, fist bump Mike Pence. Again, I don't have any great love for Mike Pence. I don't know, much about him to like or dislike or whatnot. But I was like, wow, that's kind of like me. Now, if in some ways, it's sad that you have a non-Muslim
doing that.
who's willing to take that kind of stance. I'm not saying Muslims don't. There's not that there aren't, but many Muslims have begun to kind of bleed away into this. And here's one guy who's like, and he's on the top of the political food chain, so to speak, right? I mean, he's
Very
the vice
visible.
president,
Very visible.
right? Very visible. And usually when people get to that point, they're very careful about what they say because they want to maintain their position, right? They're always playing politics. And I was like, wow, in this one instance, or actually in these two instances, he wasn't playing politics. He's like, I'm a Christian first, because at the end of the day,
That's what it is.
from dust to dust, basically, right? I got to go back. I got to go back to God, and I'm concerned about how that's going to work out. So I'm a Christian first, and then all these things second. And also, and when it came to just the moral thing of whether it was shaking hands or hugging, well, he's like, I don't really do that. And I don't think my wife would appreciate it in the same way, Muslims today are, well, it's what everybody does. So you have to shake women's hands and you have to hug and you have to da-da-da. And Mike Pence is like, I ain't got to do what everybody else does. That open and he's like, I'm an evangelical Christian. I'm not like everybody else. I'm a conservative. Again, I'm not endorsing conservatism, but he's like, I'm a conservative, which is not like everybody else. You could say more people today increasingly have a more liberal mindset. He was willing to go against the grain. If he's willing to go against the grain and he still thinks God has kids, what about us? No, I'm serious. Like, because at the end of the day, I don't want anybody confused. Like, Mike Pence is misguided. Anybody that thinks God has kids is misguided, right? But he still has, right, a conviction to his moral, the morality that he believes in. So it's important for us to embrace that, so that you can live actually a much more satisfying life. Like I don't know why I'm talking so much about Mike Pence, but you kind of get the feeling he really don't care about what anybody thinks of him but Jesus.
That's right.
Right? Which on the day of judgment is going to be a problem for him. But for right now, I can respect the guy in some means. Again, I'm not throwing shade on Mike Pence because I think he's great. I don't know. I mean, sometimes he seems like it's a little bit weird, but at the same time, he's like, you know what? And that's kind of like the Prophet said, watu for the qurba, right? Essentially, glad tidings to the strangers. What? Islam, bada Islam ghariban. Islam began strange and it will end strange. So glad tidings to the strangers. Having that willingness to be different and to be critiqued for being different and being critiqued for being odd. That's why when you look at Mike Pence and people say he's like an android or a zombie or whatever, I'm like, nah, he just ain't really interested in nobody else's opinions, nobody else's facts, ultimately, except for Jesus. Well, if you interchange me and Mike, I really don't care about nobody else's facts except for Allah, right? I mean, it's something, to be admired and kind of, to be admired and maybe just take note of. And then he goes on to talk about this problem with abstraction. I think for a lot of Muslims, not even only the youth, but just for a lot of Muslims, period, Islam seems like I think a lot of so-called Islamic theology, aqidah, it seems very abstract.
Distant.
Yeah, that it doesn't have a form, right? And I remember when I was teaching a beginning aqidah class, and I asked some of the students, these are like in their 20s, I said, do you think Allah is abstract? And some of them were like, yeah, kind of, because as we say, Allah laysa kamithlihi shay. Allah is not like
Nothing
anything
like-
else. So it becomes, I said, okay, I get it. But at the same time, Allah does have al-asma'i wa sifat. He has names and attributes. Simply because I can't draw a picture of it doesn't mean that it's abstract, right? Abstraction means, really, like, how would you describe the term abstract? What is your idea of this word? It's abstract.
Abstract, basically, and from what in simple words, that I think is taking a physical idea of something and translating and trying to your imagination trying to understand that. So when I say the term dog, as Socrates would have put it, or Aristotle, a dog doesn't appear in your head. It's this image of that you get abstraction. There is a dog, and that dog shares many similarities with other dogs. So everyone has this concept of dog, but you don't know if it's Yorkie or if it's this or that. But we know what a dog is. There's this universal concept, and I think the highest form of abstraction is the ultimate creator, which you cannot see, and everyone's abstraction of understanding of that divine source is slightly different. And some people's the difference is that it's so far they can't imagine it, so it becomes distance. It's just like an idea floating, like love, right? I really can't describe love. I can say the effects of it, but what is this concept? That's what kind of abstraction means, this imagination.
So abstract, like abstract or abstraction, I'll give you another word that rhymes with it. It has the same second component, subtraction, right? Abstract and subtract. If I say subtract 2 from 4, what is the result?
2.
2. Now, how were you able to answer that so quickly if it was a abstract concept?
What do you mean?
Maybe it's not as abstract as you think.
Right.
Abstract doesn't mean unintelligible. Let's just say that, right? So I'll stop playing word games here, right? Because something is abstract doesn't necessarily mean that it is unintelligible, right? The word ab or abstraction has ab and then abstraction, right? Ab just means to remove or to take away. So in some ways, when we say that it's true, yeah, whatever notion you have of Allah, you have to take away, right? That's why you can't draw a picture of
That's
him, right? However, simply because you can't draw a picture of him doesn't mean that it is doesn't have definition, right? And Allah has definition, right? In that He's defined Himself
Quality.
with roughly 99 names that are not the total encompassing of Him, but it's what He chose to describe Himself essentially between the Quran and Sunnah that we derive that there are 99 names, right? So for instance, Al-Ahad. We have said before that Al-Ahad, right, is what? It's one, but not two or not zero. So this is a definitive quality. Allah being Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. These are definitive qualities, right? Allah is Al-Wali, Al-Hamid, the protector and the one worthy of praise, right? I don't need to see a picture of Him to praise Him. I do not need to see a picture of Him to feel that He is my guardian, right? So even though there is no, again, there is and is not an abstraction that we should have, right? If we understand that abstraction does not mean lack of definition or unintelligible, right? And I think that just maybe perhaps the way that Muslims have learned their religion, and I fault their teachers, is that they have conveyed this idea that it's just this abstract religion full of concepts that don't ever really take any shape.
So, because in Christianity, whenever you think of God, you have this notion of a man named Jesus.
Well, yes.
So this image appears in your head, and regardless of what he looks like, but there is this image of man. But when you talk about when we are defining things, we say that there's not a shape to him. So we say, oh yeah, he's Rahim, he's Rahman. But how do you put that into a concept shape? So abstraction becomes sometimes difficult for people. And some
Right.
people are more distant than others.
Right. Even though when I tell you subtract 2 from 4, and you can immediately say 2, well, I didn't tell you to subtract any 2 particular
Mhm.
things from any 4 particular things,
Correct.
right? Matter of fact, where is the number 2 and the number 4?
Correct.
I mean, is it in my head? Is it in your head? Where is it? None of us can actually see it, and yet we can immediately say, 2. 2 subtracted from 4 is 2. So it's also a particular way in which we have trained. We've trained our brains and engaged things that will either make things right an abstraction or not an abstraction. And he said that this is the same case with morality. Neither the abstract formulation of a general rule nor the painstaking analysis of a particular situation made separate from one another, right? So, not, for instance, pork being impermissible and having to feed the poor and not fornicating and having to, like, none of these are separated. This is all comprehensive, right? We would never be able to guide ourselves to the totality of these things on our own. We would only result to what is pleasing to us, right? That's why it's also important to understand the system of morality in the Quran is going to involve things that would run counterintuitive to human reason, right? It makes no rational sense
Right.
to give your money to another person, especially a stranger, right? For us, we have to give our money, like if we earn enough, we have to pay zakat. And we give it to who? The poor Muslims. But I don't know who these poor Muslims are. Why I got to give him my money? Why couldn't he get a job? Why I got to, I'm serious. At the end of the day, man, I earned that money. And there is no rational reason, or even on Thanksgiving, like in a secular way. Oh, feed some poor people for a day, cook a turkey, whatever. I mean, none of that has any rationality to it whatsoever. Matter of fact, pure secular rationality, I think, would be unbelievably brutal. And this is what the Sam Harrises and the Richard Dawkins and the Christopher Hitchens of the world don't want to acknowledge, is that a world of pure secularity and pure reason would be a unbelievably brutal world, right? You have to have irrationality in order to actually make the world beautiful, to make it compassionate, right? There's every act of compassion at its root is far more irrational than it is rational, right? It's because we've demonized the word irrationality for some reason, right? But there's no logical sense of feeding nobody else, man, giving your money away, right? It's a purely irrational, right? Meaning that you're going to have to accept that the morality of Islam, some of it might make sense to you and others might not, but that's a sign of your limited capacity. And Allah is saying that, inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun. I know what you don't know. Right? That's part of it.
Isn't that like part of his subhanallah? Because in order to see it, you have to be above it.
Yes. Yeah. As we said, the word, the phrase subhanallah comes from sibaha, right? Tasbih means actually to be high, right? It means to be elevated, to be above, sabbih ismi rabbika al-a'la, right? Right? Elevated is the name of your Lord, the Most High, al-a'la, right? So, yes. And then therefore, Allah's ability to essentially be above everything and to look down, when just like when you're in an airplane and you look down, like you see things from a much different point of view. sometimes from, when you're on the ground, it's funny. Every time I'm in the plane, I look down, I'm like, man, when you're down there on the ground like an ant, it's like you're scrambling, but you get up in the clouds, man, and it's like, what are we doing? We're all like little ants running around here with our heads chopped off. Just, it's like you have a different view of things, and I'm not saying that I see what Allah sees, but I'm taking one incremental step of not just looking at me in the way that I normally do. And that's just as a human being looking down. That's why we often
One small step from work.
Although usually I'm somewhere halfway between terrified of actually being in a tin can floating in the middle of the air 5 miles above the earth, and then looking out the window and how absolutely tranquil and beautiful,
All the leaders must fly to see what's happening. I mean, this responsibility. You must know that this is my responsibility, and I have to take care of it. That's all.
Yeah. So being elevated, even as a human being, gives you a certain perspective on things, right? Now, Allah, who has ultimate perspective, Al-Basir, Al-Khabir, Al-Alim, Al-Sami', right, sees every and all possible, right? So yes, that elevation completely changes.
This guy I was talking to, he was trying to, talk to me about Christianity and things. I was just listening to what he was saying. So he said something that was kind of funny, because one of his atheists joined the group, and the atheist said, if God is knows best, why would you want to change his mind by praying? Because he's already elevated. He knows. Why would you tell him, hey, God, why don't you do this for me? He already knows that.
Yeah, they make these kinds of statements,
And I'm like, oh, wow.
But it isn't about changing. It's not about changing God. It's about changing yourself.
That's what I said.
They
to him.
don't
I
get
said,
this.
I think what's his name? Ali, Imam Ali has and it's one of his things about the same concept. Why do we pray to Allah when He already knows our heart?
Yes.
It's more we're trying to convince ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. This is what they fundamentally can't grasp, because it's all like kind of hyper utilitarian, right? It's all about coercion too, right? Because they see things through, again, that human lens of, as if you and God are peers, and you're just having some sort of like business transaction, or you're in a wrestling match, and it's like, no, you're not in a peer-to-peer relationship.
Yes.
You got to do what you're doing for yourself, right?
Is there like what you call it, global dysfunction where you're not able to see other people? Like we have racism, right? So you're not, the world is contaminated with racism. So we're not able to see people on our level. So we're not able to see God on His level.
Right.
Of course, yeah. I mean, actually, this is something in when you study like Aqidah or other like tafsir, something called takshif, like kashaf, right? Like Allah will put, or sometimes He talks about He will put a veil over people, right? And that's why He even told the Prophet, "Sawa'un alayhim anzartahum am lam tundirhum la yu'minun." It's the same. Talking about a particular group of people, He said it's the same whether you warn them or not; they're not going to believe. Now, this is an amazing statement.
Yeah, it is.
Right? I mean, the whole function of the Prophet is what? Balagh al-Mubin. Give the message of the Risala. Give the message of La ilaha illallah. Preach. Oh, but by the way, there's other. It doesn't matter whether you preach to them or not; they're not going to believe. But guess what? You got to preach to them anyway. No, I'm serious.
No.
He's telling them, "Am lam tundirhum la yu'minun." It doesn't matter whether you warn them or not; they're not going to believe. But preach to them anyway. That's paradoxical, right? Because number one, it was part of this is also talking about some of the leaders of Quraysh, or some of the, like, there were some people amongst them they're just not going to believe, and of course the munafiqun, some people amongst them aren't going to believe. But there are others who are in earshot that they might believe. It's kind of like Abasa wa tawalla an ja'ahum al-a'ma wa ma yudrik, right? The old blind man, but the man he was talking to, but the old blind man is like, hey, I want to hear this, right? So the one you're focused on may not be the audience.
Right.
I think the sons of Umayr ibn Khalaf, there's a sentence in Quran that
Yes, yes,
will put him in the hell and will take his kids to be in Islam.
yes,
Before he died.
Before he was
yes,
told.
yes.
And that was one of the said that when the messenger Muhammad was praying near the Kaaba and he came trying to speak with him, and the messenger
Assalamu
like,
Alaikum salam to them.
stand up, or not stand, only like went back from his sujood and gave him this sentence of Quran in his face. So he come back to Quraysh leaders. They told him, "You didn't talk with him." He said, "No," because he gave him this sentence.
Yeah.
It's in the end of Qaf, one of the sentences.
So it's Kahf.
I don't remember because I saved it in the past, but I forget it.
But no, there's many instances in the Quran where Allah says what?
سنصليه سقر وما أدراك ما سقر.
Oh,
And I think that I don't remember. I can't find it.
I'll look it up.
takes
But that
some
idea of
time
like,
to
you know,
remember that.
some people aren't going to believe, preach to
You
them
still
anyway.
there.
Because one, you're doing things ultimately, you're doing them because Allah told
Allah
you to
told
do
you
them.
to,
You're
yeah.
doing for His sake, and you're doing things for themselves. You know, it's kind of like, there's like the peddler, and then there's like the artist. The peddler is going to try to sell whatever the market is buying, right? But like an artist who is an incredible artist that reaches a level of mastery, he creates the artwork because it's what's pleasing to him, or he creates because he just wants to make something beautiful. Whether the people are interested in buying it or not, or whether they appreciate it, is either secondary or even maybe not even a concern whatsoever, right? And yet those tend to be the kinds of artists who create works of art that tend to have quite a bit of ultimate mass appeal. So even though Allah is saying about this one particular group of people, it really doesn't matter whether you preach to them or not, they're not going to believe. But in the end, the whole area that the Prophet ﷺ preached to ultimately became like 99.9% Muslim, right? So it's having this ability to expand and contract, right? The focus of what you're doing, and to incorporate, again, I keep talking about this idea of paradox. You have to incorporate it into your understanding, and doing things for themselves.
Sometimes you have to be comfortable with ambiguity,
And most importantly, uncomfortable with yourself.
right? I mean,
If you're comfortable with yourself, then you will be able to preach to people and not really have them be that. It's kind of like being an imam and you're giving a dars and like 3 people come to your dars.
no pun intended.
No pun intended, from time to day,
Yeah.
No, I mean, sometimes I'm like, when I first got into it, it was like, yeah, man, if I don't have like, 800 people coming to, no, it's like, I just do it. And it's funny because every once in a while I will get a email from somebody, and I don't do it for this, but it just shows.
Yeah.
Every once in a while I get this, I'm so glad that you record your stuff and put it out. It really helped me. It changed, it's like every once in a while, it's like, oh, wow,
It's making a difference to you whether you know it or not.
yeah, you just
Right?
do.
Yeah.
You do because it's the right thing, right? Going back to morality, you do because it's the right thing to do, not because it's the popular thing to do or because it's the legal thing to do. You do because this is something ultimately will be pleasing to Allah. So when you're giving a halaqah or a lecture, what ultimately anything that is involved in the remembrance of Allah and the Messenger, right? This is something that is ultimately going to be pleasing to Allah. So I do it for that sake in and of itself. The more you give yourself over to that as a process, then you'll be more content within yourself.
أفرأيت الذي كفر بآياتنا قال لأوتين مالا وولدا
Right.
طلع الغيب أم اتخذ عند الرحمن عهدا كلا سنكتب ما يقول ونمد له من العذاب مدا. This is the sentence. ونرثه وما يقول ويأتينا فردا. ونرثه, like his sons will be in his
Right. Right. Because it's not about him. It was not about
Yeah.
Umayyah ibn al-Khalaf, right? Like his fate was sealed,
Right.
so to speak. Right? It wasn't about him, right? So, you see that motif kind of repeating itself throughout the Quran in several different places because even the Prophet ﷺ, from time to time
Yeah.
would get kind of,
Sad.
he would really be, sad, second guessing himself, maybe even, nervous that, وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَىٰ مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَىٰ, right? That neither is your Lord angry or displeased with you, right? You can have those moments of second guess. So, not doing what everybody else does, it can cause you to second guess yourself. Being confused by, legality and morality. Oh, well, maybe it's okay now because it's legal. No, and you have to understand by taking a stance on that platform of no is going to come with some ridicule. You'll be mocked, But ultimately, if you're like that artist that just creates almost as like a compulsion.
And sometimes the results won't even be seen in your lifetime.
Of course not.
Later
Most
on.
great artists aren't appreciated until they're dead. It's true, right? I mean, so, ultimately, we all want to be appreciated by God, but none of us, if you are going to be appreciated by God, you're not really going to be appreciated till you're dead. And your book is closed, and then, the totality of what you did is taken into account, your hisab, right? And hopefully Allah will be merciful and forgiving, and you will, so in many ways, it's like we want to be like that great artist, but also get all the praise and accolades in his lifetime. Like, no, like most great artists had to go through years of rejection, suffering. Nobody knew who they were, right? Then, like, boom, they die, and all of a sudden the next day, man, this dude was like the greatest ever.
This stuff yesterday or day before Nipsey Hussle's funeral. I'm like, where did this guy come from? I had no clue.
Yeah.
But there were thousands of people. Like,
yes. Yeah. Which, that's where the Prophet said, he said, make abundant, through that, right? Make frequent remembrance of the destroyer of pleasure, meaning death, because in that same way, our notoriety with Allah, right, our standing with Allah will not truthfully be manifested until we leave this life, right? When we can't have both. We cannot have this super high, all the time, right? And then living in this life. They're not going to be at the same time. You may have some and then not, and ups and downs, right? But your true standing with Allah will not be known until you leave this life. And that's just how it works. So the further that the sooner you embrace that as a process of living in this life, then you can begin treading on the road, I think, to contentment. So, barakallah fik. Something to consider. Yeah. Heavy stuff, man.
No, it is. Especially when you're talking about abstraction. There's a Buddhist saying that God is knowable but yet indescribable. Or not Buddhist. I think I don't know. I read it somewhere. And I thought that was pretty interesting. He's knowable, but you can't really describe him. But I think what you had mentioned, that there are qualities that we can describe.
No, God is knowable and
just,
describable.
Just the concept of personal
you
God.
just can't draw a picture of him.
So what is the concept of personal God in Islam?
Well, number one,
is that relationship not a personal? Is it just like it's a master slave sort of?
Well, I mean, there is
Rob-
that aspect. I mean, even the idea of personal.
personal Jesus.
Yeah, reach out, touch faith. No, I mean, so usually the way that the law says what, ilahukum wahid, right? Ilahukum, not personal. You alls, right? God is one, or Rabbukum, right? You all's Lord, meaning in the plural. So again, that's where I think, especially one of the faults of Western society is an over accentuating of the individual, right? And that we all have a personal relationship with Allah, but you know what? At the same time, that's kind of also I push back. I think that's a little bit of a ridiculous statement because the Quran speaks to us in the sigha, in the voice of the collective, of the plural. So it isn't just that I have a personal relationship with God. I have a personal relationship with Allah. I have a communal relationship with Allah
That's a good.
because I am part of a community. I'm not just simply an individual. And I know that's very hard. I mean, yes, I have to individually pray. Even if I'm praying in the jama'ah, I still got to physically do the prayer, even though the imam is leading it, right? So this turns on its head this idea of individual or personal relationship. No, you have a communal,
That's a good way to put it.
or again, paradox. You do and you don't have a personal. You do and you don't have a communal. They're both like it's a tapestry that's woven together. They're both in there. So I don't like always this idea of this only focusing on the individual, because in fact, the way that you will be successful in your Islam is to be part of a group. And this is so emphatically impressed upon both in the language of the Quran and from the descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ, always emphasizing the group.
Even the Quran when it's came, I mean, God can save the Quran in your mind in one minute. Everyone can save the Quran in his mind. Not Quran, the rules that God wants, but He knows that by doing the Quran, by reading the Quran, all the people will come together and they read together, and they will communicate and explain to each other the parts of it, and everyone has his idea.
Yeah, it's we in
So
the
it's
West
communication.
we have too much shakhsiyah, too much individualism. I think that was one of the beneficial parts. When I was young and growing up, and like I said, I learned Japanese as a kid. Well, the way that I learned Japanese was that I think in the third grade or whatever, several families came to the area from Japan, and then, so I kind of encountered this little microcosm, of Japanese culture. And one of the things about, Japanese culture, or especially Eastern culture, I think in general, and specifically Japanese culture, there is a huge de-emphasis on the individual and a huge emphasis on the group,
Correct.
right? Where you don't want to bring shame to the group, but not only do you not want to bring shame, but you also want to bring honor to the group, right? And that you want being part of the group is very important. And the way that you do that is you de-emphasize the individual somewhat, right? That's something that is very different here, where everything is about the individual. I mean, we're all people, but that can be taken to a fault. So I think for me, there's just my journey towards Islam. I always say it didn't begin when I was 18 or 19 years old when I took Shahada. It began when I was even younger, in that idea of what was going to be necessary to be successful as a Muslim was this idea of de-emphasizing the individual and being part of a group.
Yeah.
You
that's
know,
a very
Like people
important-
think that, you became an imam, you're a leader. It's like, no, dude, I became simply the hood ornament of a car, of which there are many passengers. Like, I don't like this overemphasis on like imam. I mean, there's no imam without a jama'ah.
Right.
right? I mean, the imam, the literal meaning, what you lead the prayer, you're standing in front of people. Well, if I'm just praying by myself, am I imam? Right? So this, again, there's too much focus on the individual, and therefore the imam is just one component. People to put too much emphasis on the ulama, the imma, right, the fuqaha, all this stuff. But it's like, what good are the ulama if there's not tulab?
It's like the DNA.
You know,
Every time, like when you see the religion, they start with someone who knows something. People always go to this man, and the end, this man will be like after 1,000 years will be like a god for them. So it's like something in the DNA of the human. He wants something to depend on,
yeah,
and second, he wants something to see.
yes,
So always you see the gods. It's like they make it like from a stone,
Form.
like Buddhism.
yeah. Even the mushrikun from the Arabs. I mean, that was one of their criticisms. They're like, well, if you're really the messenger of Allah, well then,
Show us.
show us. We want to see Allah come down, or an
Angel.
angel, or da 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 da, right? So, but no, this overemphasis on the individual is
Interesting.
toxic.
Pessimistic thing that God didn't send angels when they want. Like Jibril can many times he came in the middle of the people and after he leave.
Because it's not on their agenda. The whole thing is that
It's-
they would have believed if they even if
If he's
Yeah.
if he's came
No, and Allah
as well.
says, like, well, one day I will come, right? And when I come, لَقُضِيَ بَيْنَهُمْ,
that's it.
right? And when I do come, there won't be any talking, right? I will be the only one doing the talking, right? So even the day that I do come, when you finally get your request answered, is again, this is not going to be a peer-to-peer conversation. When I do come,
Yeah,
nobody else will be talking.
that's right.
Arabic people, that's why you think. I mean, maybe it's a good environment that time. They always in the desert. They looking to the sky. They looking to the stars. So they see this for the universal. Now, when we're talking about God, they make him like smaller, and the end then like a pot
To a form.
because they don't know what's the ability of this thing. Only some words like
Mhm.
simple. His mercy, you will like the Christian. You will get in the paradise even if you make
Yeah.
anything.
No, I just think it's funny when people
Something
talk about,
simple, very simple. You
Uh,
don't.
yeah,
You don't know everything about God.
or they say, oh, I want God to come in person. Okay,
Yeah, like
when God does go, وَلَا يَمْلِكُونَ مِنْهُ خِطَابًا, right? Allah says what? That when I do come on that day, nobody else will be speaking. So the idea that you want me to come and we're going to have some kind of conversation, I don't think you understand
So
who you're talking to.
it's not a personal relationship. It's a community.
No, I mean it has
you
it
have
has
to-
personal.
When you pray in the
Like-
middle of the night to ask, there is a personal. You're doing
Even in the
request.
Jama'ah, I mean, like I said, just because the Imam is leading the Salah doesn't mean you can just sit down. It's like, it's not like when I'm leading the Salah in Jama'ah, it's not like you guys can just go in the kitchen and start. Well, he's praying, so it's okay. No, you have to follow. You still have to participate.
Yeah.
Right. So the individual still has an obligation for participation and doing these things. Right. However, it is not something that can be artificially spliced and separated from your communal. That's the difference, is that, I saw that in Japanese culture. It's not that they were devoid of any individualism. It just wasn't elevated to the point where it became kind of obnoxious. I think that's the thing in Western culture. We have elevated the individual to a point of being obnoxious,
Right.
right? And Islam is a balance.
Yeah.
It's not about getting rid of the individual, but at the same time, if you elevate the individual, kind of like what Ahmed has said, you'll wind up worshiping the individual.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is kind of what they did with Isa alayhi salam. They elevate, or like even with the Siddhartha, right? With the Buddha, they took this guy who might have been like, I don't know, maybe he was like a really cool dude, right? but then they elevated him
To a
because
godlike.
there's something, this individualism where you start praising people.
Maybe the religion people, like I see it in Iraq. We have a story about that. It's a funny story. Someone, he has a donkey and donkey dead, so they trying to use the donkey, so they make a grave for him and building, and they said that this is Sayyid something. So the people went to him. So there are two: the one who graved him and built the building, and the owner of the donkey.
It's like we want to.
So
There's
in the
this
end,
in our DNA. There's we want to
the
hold
owner,
on to something.
the owner of the donkey left, like he traveled to some area. When he came back, he told him, "Where is the money?" I said, "It's our donkey. It's our donkey, and we know how we were graving, so we know what's we done here. So don't ask about the money."
It's no, it's a weird tendency in us sometimes, to act like that. But so yeah, the personal thing is like, you're not going to have a personal, just in simple, for brevity's sake, like you're not going to have a personal relationship with God
Because
without
God's
a
not
communal,
talking.
Because
Because-
number one, he ain't talking to you,
That's the point.
right? He ain't talking just
he's not.
to you,
Yeah.
right? Matter of fact, we don't believe that God talks to any
Anybody.
human being anymore
And
right
if they
now.
do, they need to be put in a mental
Yeah,
hospital.
no, either they're making it up or they're Majnun. Either you're Kadhab or Majnun, right? I mean, this is one of the foundational things we believe.
It's about ability.
And there's no
even if he want to speak with you, for example, I don't think your body will
Regardless, but
Except-
in this
except
reality, he's not speaking to you. He only speaks to you through the Quran and the Prophet.
yeah, because
That's it.
when it's
no.
the
It
story
doesn't
of
mean that
Ibrahim
God still
on the
isn't
mountain,
showing you things. This is why
Yeah,
it
yeah.
says, well,
it's about
But I'm talking about physically idea.
yeah,
coming into
no.
your
There
head.
ain't no.
There's no revelation.
Nobody's got
This
two Campbell soup cans with a rope tied to it, one here and one up in the sky.
Yes.
No,
This is a very important point because a lot of people feel
because
that.
when Ibrahim want to see God, what he done?
I know.
I mean, it's only he didn't spoke with him. He just, I don't know how all the mountain goes on. So it's something from God and what's happened with it, or as Jibril when he want to destroy the area near Black Sea
Yes,
in Jordan. He said in the tip of his finger,
yes.
it turned all the ground upside down. And when I went there, I see the car like you are driving 40 miles or 80 miles from Amman to this area. You'll see your car going down. I mean, you travel, and all the mountains it's I mean, Amman is like similar to the desert with some mountains, some hills. But when you go there, you'll find that there is something rubbish there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So this idea of you're gonna have like your personal again popular culture, personal Jesus, right? This
This is a
is
very important point.
it's important because it seeps into our unconscious, and then we begin to take this as if it's also revelation.
Right. And this is key that you're not going to get revelation.
Yeah,
You're
revelation
not-
is done now.
Done.
Ain't no
And so-
human
so-
being talking to God like two way, right? Now you can talk to God all you want, I do, right? But it ain't a
Right.
2-way conversation,
That's
right? And you will not have a personal relationship with Allah without a communal relationship, right? It's that's how it works. And this is the problem of everybody. Well, I don't like this masjid. I don't like this imam. But these people, man, enough of all that.
Yeah.
Honestly, enough of all that.
He's not personally.
And this is
catering to
why
you.
those people that get caught off, this is like where the Prophet ﷺ talks about that those people become like the wolf comes in and it just picks off the weak animal in the pack, right? Your strength is in the jama'ah. Even your iman will be. This is why actually when people lose faith, when they withdraw from the jama'ah of the Muslims, And then what happens is you withdraw from one group, but you in some ways join another. You join the jama'ah of secularism or atheism or nihilism or nothingism, but you go from one group to another. So your increased faith and lack of faith grows because you're with this other group, right? And it decreases because you've left the group of the Muslims. Likewise, you'll find people that when they start coming around in the Jama'ah, they come with the group, they come regularly, what their faith starts to kind of go up. Because you will incline to whatever group that you're in. And whether you realize it or not, you're always in some kind of group.
Yeah.
Right? Either overtly or non-overt, you're always in some kind of a group. You're always participating in some kind of group think, whether you realize it or not. And this is important for I get so impatient when I hear people talking about, well, I don't really go to the masjid anymore. But then when you sit down and talk to them, man, like they ain't praying, they doing all this other stuff, they whining about their, I just don't really have yeah, you know why? Because you've left the group. Like you think it's some sort of personal Olympics to achieve faith and have piety. It's not a personal Olympics. It's a group effort. And the sooner you get this through your thick skull, and then also be willing to humble yourself, because it ain't Burger King, right? They don't get sauce on the side and your way right away. When you are able to humble yourself and participate in the group, then things will become better for you. But if you are committed and addicted to individualism, you're going to find it difficult to get along in a group, because you're not going to have the ability to negotiate and also be somewhat realistic about it's not always going to be about you. Some people are going to get on your nerves. That's like family. I mean, sometimes people get on your nerves, but you're a family. But
I agree.
alhamdulillah.
I mean, yesterday my daughter asked me, she told me about if we pray, did we change the destiny? Yes, why not? If God accepted, we will change your destiny. She said, no, it's a destiny. So every people will, if you change the destiny,
Determinism
she's speaking
versus
about
free will.
physics. If you change the destiny, all the people's destiny will change. I told her, yeah, it's God. God doing that. He can't change everything.